All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Emma, Daniela, Carrie, Jude.
So one thing we forgot to do, Olivia, was could you allow
Hi,
screen
Olivia.
sharing while we're letting everyone in?
Yes. Hello, how are we all this evening?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Very happy it's Monday. So who's got a trip coming up soon? Do you want to drop it in the chat while I just figure out how to share this screen for... Oh,
There we go. I think
here we
that's
go.
all good.
All right, who has a trip coming up over the next few weeks? Drop it in the chat. A yes, if you do. Yes, Kim does.
I can't find the chat. Oh God.
It's just down the bottom beside.
Yeah, found it. Got it.
Perfect. Yes, we have a few. Uzbekistan and Aperna. Love it, love it, love it. All right, so Rowan has come in and he's going to have a lovely, lovely presentation for you all about how to train and to help conquer your last minute jitters and the have I done enoughness before your upcoming trips. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and I'll hand it over to Rowan.
Thank you very much, Lydia. Well, welcome everyone. Lovely to have a bunch of people on the call again, and really looking forward to having a bit of a chat. Today we are talking, all about final training before a trip, because Livia was saying lots of trips coming up at the moment. Obviously, getting down to the crunch time on the training can get a little bit tricky. Today we're just talking through a little bit on that. So let me share my screen. I'll get up my old presentation, and we will get into it. So as usual, how we're going to run this is basically, I've got a little presentation I'm going to take everyone through. And then, as we come through, if anyone does have any questions or anything about this specifically, this particular topic, or really anything else with your training, feel free to pop it in the chat. And then whatever time we have at the end, I'll just cover any questions that are sitting in the chat as we come through. So, with that being said, if you haven't come across me before, I'll do the old spiel about who I am. My name is Rowan Smith. I'm the founder of Summit Strength, which is an online personal training service specifically for hikers. Now, essentially, we help hikers in a few different situations. Really, sort of comes down to three sort of big categories. Number one, which I think a lot of people in here in this situation have a big trip coming up, and they're like, you know what, got a big adventure, want to be in the best physical position to not only get through it, but also enjoy myself. Also work with lots and lots of people who do struggle with a bit of ankle pain, so knee pain, foot pain, back pain, really common for hikers. We help a lot of people like that. And also lots of hikers who are kind of in a regular hiker. They may not have a big trip in their sights, but they just like to get on the trail pretty regularly, but they feel like their physical condition is holding them back a bit. Now, I personally trained and prepared, over 400 hikers for every trip imaginable. These days, not just me as part of the team, but we have a bit of team around us. Definitely helped a lot of people, getting ready for lots and lots of stuff. Now, basically, plan of attack for today is, talking about these final weeks before an adventure. As you said, lots of people coming pretty close. Most people kind of fall into this situation where the trip is starting to get a little bit closer. We've been thinking about it for months, possibly even years. Maybe this is something you've been wanting to do for ages. It's been back your mind for ages. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, it is just around the corner. For some people, this can be a really exciting time. You're like, you know what, I'm counting down the days, counting down the hours. I literally cannot wait till I hit the trail. And some people are in this situation where they're absolutely excited. Other people, this can be really stressful. And then you're like, oh my gosh, can't believe it's here already. Am I going to be ready? Am I going to be enjoying myself? Am I going to be holding people back? My body going to hold up? All of this stuff can sort of go into a bit of a mental mix, which can make it a little bit stressful. Now, regardless of what situation you're in, whether you're super excited, you're feeling like 100% ready, or whether you're like really stressed, you're like, oh my gosh, this is really intimidating. Regardless of what situation you're in, the final weeks around your training and your physical preparation, you want to get them right. Because we want to make sure that we want to make sure the body and the mind is entering your trip in the best possible position for you. So we do want to get these final sort of weeks right. So whether, well, yeah, literally what I just said. So whether we're feeling prepared or not, we want to make sure we are in the best possible position for your own situation that you can get there. So today we're really going to dive into these last sort of 2 to 3 weeks of training, kind of what it all looks like. Now, what we're going to be covering today is number one, final training if you've been consistent with your preparation. So if you feel like you've had a good handle on your training, you've been building things up and you're going to feeling good, feeling fit, feeling strong, a lot of people are like, what should I be doing the last couple of weeks? We'll cover that. Pretty simple process to talk you through it. On the flip side, which I know probably more people fall into, is a final training if you're kind of feeling a bit underprepared. And if you're like, oh my gosh, date's coming up here, I'm really not sure if I'm really in the best possible position. We're going to cover a few strategies around that. And we're also just going to talk through little simple ideas that you can do in the final weeks just to make sure you're kind of covering a few really simple bases, which can make a big difference on the trail. So to start with, let's talk about consistent trainers. And hopefully this is a majority, but more than likely, I would sort of say very rarely people are feeling really, really 100% ready. But if you have been training consistently, there'll be many and you've been sort of building up your fitness, building up your strength, you're doing your hikes, hiking, all good. Many hikers will often fall into a couple of common mistakes in their final weeks. So they've been training really, really well, comes up to the last couple of weeks, and they kind of often fall into a couple of tricky situations. Now, mistake number one is people like in such a good role with their fitness, such a good role with their training. Maybe this is the most consistent they've been actually with their fitness in a long, long time because they've been able to tie it towards this training, this hike. Some people make the mistake of thinking, hey, I'm just going to train hard until the last day that I leave. They're like, I'm going to squeeze every little ounce of fitness in, or maybe this is just my routine, and they just train and train and train and train and train until the day they fly out or drive out. Or they're kind of worrying that, okay, not only do I want to squeeze the last bits, but they're worried, hey, if I have too much of a break before the trip, I'm going to lose the fitness that I've been building and I'm going to go backwards, which is obviously not much fun. Now, the tricky thing here is basically if we train all the way up to the end, the body doesn't really get enough time to recover, consolidate, and adapt. So essentially, when it comes down to our training, the body doesn't get fitter, stronger, or more resilient when we actually do our training sessions. Essentially, the body gets fitter, stronger, more resilient when we recover from our training sessions. So we apply stress to the body's like, I don't like that, it recovers, it gets better. Now, if we don't give the body time to actually go through that recovery process, not only are we going to enter the trip feeling a little bit fatigued, but we're sort of leaving a lot of our sort of benefits of our training on the table, which is a little bit unfortunate. And also you can potentially enter your trip feeling a bit fatigued, which is not what we really want. Now, mistake number two is basically doing nothing in the final period. Flip side of this, they're like, hey, I've trained loads, I need to give myself a good rest, and they're aware of that, but they end up doing absolutely nothing during that period. Now, people think, hey, this will give the body good rest before it hit the trip, which is true, but it does have a couple of issues. Number one, a lot of people, they'll be training, all of a sudden they'll do nothing. And then what will happen is they'll just feel like the body just gets a little bit tight, or they'll just see a bit of dip in energy when they're doing absolutely nothing. Purely for the fact that they're just doing nothing. They're sitting a lot more. They're like, I've got all this extra time. What am I going to do? More than likely, we end up watching a TV show or reading a magazine or sitting down somewhere. And we just get a little bit tired. It happens to a lot of people. And ultimately, if we do this for too long, if we do this for, way too long, some elements of fitness can begin to go backwards a little bit. It doesn't happen immediately. It's not usually a massive dramatic cause of concern, but it can happen. And then on top of this, probably the most important out of all of this is typically in the final weeks before an adventure, stress is pretty high. We're finishing up at work, we've got the anxiety of the trip coming up, maybe we've got to, leaving a family or a partner or whatever it may be. All this organization, stress is usually way up here before you go. And exercise can help manage this. It can help manage the stress, help you sleep a bit better, help you stay healthy, all of this stuff during this period. So we definitely don't want to fall into this mistake of doing absolutely nothing. So basically, for consistent trainers, here's a really, 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 really simple approach that you can look at with your training. If you're in this situation, get out a pen and paper, jot this down. There's not much to write out, but it's really, really simple. Now, basically, a better approach to this, instead of training all the way to the end or doing absolutely nothing, is what people call a taper. This is what's known in sports. Basically, this is where you pull back your training pretty significantly, and about 1 to 2 weeks before a trip, but we still keep on doing something to keep you ticking over. So we pull things back, but we still do something. And ultimately, this gets a good balance between everything. It sits between those two mistakes of doing too much or too little and sits in the middle. Pretty straightforward. Now, there are many, many, many different ways of going about this. Like, it's like, how long is a piece of string? So many, there's no answer to this, but this is a really, really simple advice that I learned, which I think is just, you can't get wrong. Anyone can do it. You don't really need a huge amount of knowledge about training to do. Very, very straightforward. Now, number one, typically 2 weeks before you fly out, 2 to 3 weeks before you fly out, you want to have done your final long training hike. Meaning, whatever your long, long, long hike you're going to do, probably about 2 weeks before you go, or 3 weeks before you go, somewhere within that vicinity, you kind of want to just get that done. That's where the peak of your hiking sort of hits the point where you've done the hardest one. You're like, boom, I'm done. Happy days. This is all good. Typically, around that, we want to get that done. Now, essentially, once that's out of the way, then we enter our taper period. We're like, we've done the hardest thing physically in our training. Now we want to pull things back. Essentially, the second last week before you go out on a trip, you want to take whatever training you've been doing, whatever's been your normal routine, and do about 75% of it. Just reduce it down by like a quarter. So what that sort of looks like, if you've been doing strength training, for example, is if you've been on these calls before, I always talk about strength training for hiking. If you've been doing strength training, just take whatever you've been doing, cut it down by a quarter. So you can either reduce repetitions. So if you've been doing an exercise and say you do 10 repetitions of an exercise last week, go and do it this week, but just do 7. Or if you've been doing 3 sets of a routine and you've been repeating exercises 3 times, do 2 times, whatever it may be. It's not exact as 75%, but it's around that, pretty straightforward. Or if you're doing cardio, if you've been going out doing some pack walking or some cycling or some stair and hill sessions or whatever it may be, just reduce the time down to 75%. Or if you've been doing pretty short sessions, you can just reduce the intensity down to 75%. Basically, we're just pulling things back or whatever it may be. And everyone's going to be doing different situations. Everyone's going to be doing different things. So, you can figure out that up yourself. If you're doing gym classes, which I know a lot of people do, you may not be able to reduce the time, but you may just say, you know what, actually, I'm going to work at like 75% of the intensity that I've been doing. I'm just going to kind of, work moderately or whatever, but whatever it is. Pretty straightforward. And then the hiking, once you've done that longest hike, basically, you don't want to be pushing your hiking too much. So you can basically just do very, very no hiking at all in these last couple of weeks. It's fine. That's not going to go backwards as long as you're still doing something. Or you can just do a really short one, like 1-2 hours, something like that. Really, really gentle or whatever it may be. Very simple. So that's your second last week before the trip. Now, the final week before the trip, so last sort of 7 days, 5-7 days, whatever it may be, we kind of pull things back again and make it really, really simple. Number one, what I typically recommend is just each day aim to do a short, easy pack walk with a pack weight you expect for your trip. So if you're expecting about 5 kilos in your pack or 60 kilos in your back or 7 kilos in your pack, whatever it may be, pack that up, have it at your front door, just go out and do a short little walk around the block once a day. This could be anywhere from 15 to 40 minutes if you have loads of time, whatever it may be. And that's just designed just to tell the body, hey, you're wearing this pack. Hey, I'm going to stretch my legs, but it's super simple. You shouldn't be very fatigued from that. And on top of that, if you have any extra time, just spending extra time doing stretching or like self-massage. So self-massage is like foam rolling or using a ball or using like anything like that. And that's essentially a final week where you're just working on those 2 things. You should be itching and ready to go and full of energy by the time you go. And that's really, really straightforward. So 2 weeks beforehand, pull things back to about 75%. Last week, just simple pack walking, stretching, self-massage. As I said before, this isn't the only way of going about this, but I find this is really, really nice. Some balance between everything works out pretty well. So thanks for our consistent trainers, and hopefully a bunch of people in this call fall into that, and you can just apply that. You should be laughing by the time you head off. Now, on the flip side of things, those who are underprepared. You may have been getting to this point where you're like, trip's coming up, and for one reason or another, your training hasn't been going as well as you'd hoped. Maybe you've been doing a little bit, maybe you haven't been doing anything at all, whatever it may be. Everyone's going to have their own definition of underprepared. So if you just feel like, hey, I'm just not ready for this trip or anything like that, and you just mentally feel like that, you'll fall into this category. Now, when it comes down to being underprepared, and if you're like, hey, I've got a couple of weeks to go, trip's coming up pretty close, we want to be really, really smart about your training here. Because ultimately, we want to ensure that this last little block of time that you have, that you can fit in what you can with your training. You can develop what fitness and what strength you can during this time. However, we need to balance out with the fact that we're not overdoing it during this time. Because I've heard with loads and loads and loads of stories of hikers who basically aren't so good with their training, whatever it may be, comes down to the last 2 weeks, and they'll train, and all of a sudden they'll get foot pain or knee pain, and they'll go out on the trip and they'll be like, oh my gosh, that wasn't much fun. Or they'll just absolutely exhaust themselves during that time. They'll end up getting sick. They'll end up ending the trip really tired, and it's just not much fun either. So we need to find this balance. Even if you are feeling like you're really underprepared, you need to be smart about this. So yeah, and the example here is like a lot of people like, okay, I've got 2 weeks to go. I'm just going to hike or pack walk long distances every single day, and then their feet flare up. Because one of the biggest risk factors in regards to pain and injury presenting itself is all of a sudden just a big ramp up in what we call load. So a big ramp up in stress through certain parts of the body, and the feet end up copping the brunt when it comes to, hiking preparation. Really, 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 really common. I can't tell you how many stories I've talked to hikers about this. So when it comes down to it, the real fact is if you haven't been consistent with your training over time, there isn't a dramatic amount of difference you can make in 2 weeks. Really, the training sort of builds on itself. It's a long-term thing. A lot of the adaptations when it comes to fitness and strength, it's sort of week after week after week and month after month of building things up. That's where all the good stuff comes. So 2 weeks, you can make some changes. It's not going to make a dramatic thing, but ultimately, if you're in this position, we need to do what we can. And some is better than none. And the more that you can kind of fit in, and the better work you can do here, probably the better chance you'll have of having fun on the trip. So a few ideas here, and again, this isn't set in stone. This is just something I quite like, and I think it's accessible to like most people. And I think it's pretty simple. You don't need a huge amount of training background knowledge or anything like that. But there's a bit of a process that I quite like. Now, to start with, you need to sit down and do a little bit of planning. Number one, you need to think about the trip coming up and just ask yourself, what are the main things I'm worried about with this trip? For example, pack weight might be a big one. You might be like, you know what, I haven't actually carried a 6 kilo pack yet. I'm a little bit worried about that. Or it might be hills. You might be like, you know what, I've got lots of hills coming up, whatever it may be. Or stairs or something like that. And I probably should say, what are the main things worrying about you on the trip which you have access to? So a lot of you may be going to high altitude. And you're like, well, I can't just go to a top of a mountain and sit there for a few days. What are the things that are worrying about you which you have access to? List them down, whatever they may be. Now, number two, our second thing we kind of want to have a think about here is you want to have a think about how you might find some access to do what we call low impact cardio. It's some type of thing that you can do low impact cardio. So what I mean by that is cardiovascular exercise where you're doing something for an extended period of time. Something that's not going to be putting too much pressure through the feet. Something that's not going to be sort of like, putting pressure through the joints, basically. So a few examples of this is, okay, walking with the pack, with the stairs, it's not high impact, but you're working through the feet. Now, what we want to look at this low impact stuff is something that's really, really gentle on the feet, basically. Stationary bike or a normal bike, it might be elliptical, might be swimming, might be the rower, something like that. This stuff, admittedly, not everyone will have access to. Some of this stuff may need you if you don't have a stationary bike sitting at home with like the laundry sitting on it. You might have to go to a gym for 2 weeks, which I know a lot of people hate. I know a lot of people won't have access to. But if you find yourself in this situation, it may be worthwhile just getting a casual pass for a couple of weeks just so you have access to something like that. And I'll explain why this is important in a moment. But just something like this. Worst case scenario, if you're like, you know what, I just have zero access to any of this, or I just don't have time, or whatever it may be, we can kind of replace this with slow unloaded walking. But for perfect world, something like this. Now, essentially what we want to do from here is we basically figured out, okay, what are the main things we're worried about? And we figured out something that kind of fits within that low impact situation. We want to come up with a bit of a plan. Now, essentially, we're going to lay out the days until you can go away. And essentially what we want to do is try to aim to do something almost every single day. And essentially what we want to do is alternate between doing something that's hiking specific. So when I say hiking specific, something like, okay, this is me walking, basically. This is me walking with a pack, doing stair sessions, doing hill sessions, maybe even hiking. And if I have time for that, whatever it may be. Alternating between doing days of that and then doing something that's a little bit more low end. So what I mean by this, an example of this, an example week. On Monday, we may say, okay, you know what? I work a full day on a Monday. After work, I'm going to go out and do 30 minutes of pack walking around the local neighborhood. Well, Tuesday, we're like, okay, all right, on Tuesday, what I'm going to do is this is the low impact session. Maybe I'll go do some cycling. I've got an old push bike. I'll go do a little cycle after work. Or maybe I'll go do some swimming. I'll get up early and go down the local pool and do some swimming or whatever it may be. Then Wednesday, we go back to our hiking specific stuff. Maybe I'll do some stairs or some hills or something like that. Thursday, go back to that low impact option. Friday, maybe I have the day off. I can actually go out hiking. Saturday, low impact again. Sunday, pack walking, yada, yada, yada. Now, the idea behind this is we're cramming in a lot of work here. We're cramming in a lot of cardio, which is the main thing we need for our hiking. But we're going to be giving the joints a bit of a break in between all those walking sessions. Because technically, if we ended up doing 7 days of just pack walking, stair hill climbing, and hiking, you'd end up the week not feeling amazing. Some people get through it, but a lot of people will kind of like, oh, I'm a little bit achy. Alternatively, we can alternate between these two. It can get a lot of work done with much less risk of just flaring things up before your trip. And it works really effectively when you're just trying to cram a lot of stuff in. So that's kind of that's kind of what I would recommend if you are feeling really underprepared. You may not have the time to do 7 days in a week. And in that situation, and if you're having a day off in between, you can probably just do walking sessions, pack walking, stair climbing, whatever it may be. But if you're kind of trying to cram in as much work as you can, that's a simple session to follow through. Now, on top of that, okay, you may be like, okay, I go to a gym, maybe occasionally I do a class, or maybe I do other random bits and pieces. Just ask yourself, what categories this fall into? Is this something that's going to kind of put a bit of pressure through the feet? If so, it's fine, but that probably falls in your hiking specific stuff. If it's not doing any pressure through the feet, then it falls into the other stuff. Rule of thumb, you can figure things out there. Now, a few important points in regards to this, kind of get the most of it. Typically, with the walking stuff, so the pack walking, the stair climbing, the hiking, if you're trying to cram in a lot of stuff in a small amount of time, 2 good rules of thumb. Number 1, keep your walking slow. Now, slower walking is a simple way of just taking a little bit of pressure off the feet, off the knees, off the hips. And sometimes we have a tendency when we're just trying to do our walking sessions, we'll end up power walking, which is fine. It's all well and good. But if you are trying to cram a lot into a short amount of time, just slowing down your walking sessions can go a long way. Now, on top of that, when I say moderate difficulty, is basically these sessions, you want to get yourself some challenge. You want to finish the workouts feeling like you've done something, because obviously you're trying to cram in a bit amount of fitness, but it's not the go hard or go home thing. You don't have to push to exhaustion where you're like, oh my gosh, that was the worst thing in the world or anything like that. Essentially, to cram a lot of stuff in, slow walking and moderate intensity, pretty good. Now, the low impact sessions. So if we're looking at cycling, if we're looking at swimming, if we're looking at elliptical, the rower, these low impact sessions which don't put too much pressure through the feet, these can be as difficult as you want. You can push these if you feel like. You can actually turn these into really difficult sessions, but because they're not putting a huge amount of pressure through the joints, you have a lot of leeway here where you can actually really push it if you want, and it's without risk of, again, flaring things up, or a lower risk. Alternatively, if you're like, oh, you know what, I'm struggling with energy, or maybe like I don't enjoy that sessions or anything like that, then you can do anywhere from super fast and super difficult on these low impact ones to moderate or easy, whatever you want. Like, you kind of choose what you want to do here. An example of this is on the fast or difficult thing, might be interval training. You might be on a stationary bike and be like, you know what, I'm going to do 3 minutes really quick and rest for a minute. I'm going to do that a bunch of times. And that'll be a really good workout. I'm going to work really hard. That'll be really beneficial for you. That's going to be a pretty tough session. Or alternatively, you're like, no, that's not for me. Maybe I'm just going to do 40 minutes just riding at a pace where I can kind of push it, but it's just a steady pace. Whatever. You have a lot of leeway here, but basically the walking, we want to keep it slow. The low impact, you have the options going fast or slow, pretty much. And ultimately, if you are with this situation doing unloaded walking, so you're like, I don't have access to a bike or a pool or anything like that, I'm going to use unloaded walking here, keep the walking slow and easy as opposed to pushing it too quickly. Because again, we're just trying to manage loads through the feet. And then on top of that, during this time when you're trying to squeeze everything in, we want to think about recovery as well, because basically if we are training really hard, we just want to make sure we're supporting the body to recover in between periods, so we don't overdo things, so we don't get too run down, and again, so aches and pains don't creep up too much. So doing a bit of stretching, self-massage just through the week. It doesn't have to be too complicated. Just think what muscles are a bit sore, what muscles have been working. Do a bit of stretching there. 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day goes a long way. Typically during this time, I would really recommend not restricting your eating. So not everyone, but a lot of people will sometimes tie their hiking, their training, to like a weight loss goal, which is just a different goal altogether. Nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't have too much to do with your fitness or anything like that. And one of the things we really want to make sure is when we're trying to squeeze a lot of fitness in, that we are fueling the body adequately to get through the sessions, and also the recovery. So if you are in a situation where maybe you're trying to restrict your eating, maybe you're on a diet for one reason or another, don't worry about it for 2 weeks. Yes, eat healthy, but don't hold back your eating. Just eat as much as you need during this time. Make sure you're looking after your sleep as well. So again, sleep can get impacted during this time. Can be very, very stressful with a lot of things coming up. Just make sure you're looking after your sleep. Take a break from screens for an hour before you go to bed. Maybe read a book, do some journaling, something like that. Maybe do your stretching right before bed, which can help. Maybe do a bit of deep breathing. I don't know. There's a million and one things. You go on the internet. How can I help onto Google? How do I help my sleep? A million and one tips. Put one or two of those into action. Just look after your sleep during this time. And ultimately, even if you are a bit underprepared, still probably give yourself like 48 hours proper rest before you hop on a plane or before you fly out. So even if you're trying to cram all this stuff in, still give yourself, a couple of days of just sort of very, very light stuff or chilling out. So ultimately, it's not a perfect situation, but I feel like this is a good way of just sort of cramming in a lot of work and just getting enough out of this time that it will give you that edge for, well, getting through the trip and also being closer to enjoying it as well. Yeah. Now, a few little bits and pieces in regards to this, a few sort of tips that will fall into both categories. So people who are prepared and people who are underprepared, just to kind of get a little bit more out. Now, nutrition. So basically, nutrition plays a massive role. If you haven't watched the Managing Fatigue webinar, I think I did a month or 2 or 3 ago. If you haven't seen that replay, that talks to a lot of good tips you can put into action very, very quickly, which can make a big difference on the trip in regards to energy. So if you haven't seen that, definitely reach out to the crew and have a watch of it. But ultimately, when it comes down to these final weeks, big rule of thumb is any snacks or electrolyte supplements which you are planning on taking on the trail. So if you're planning on having electrolytes, which is a big plus, really, really good. If you're planning on bringing your own snacks on top of whatever's coming with the trip, make sure you test them out in these final weeks if you haven't, because the last thing you want to do is all of a sudden get on the trail, have your electrolyte supplement for the first time, and you're like, oh, you know what, the stomach doesn't like that. Then you're in the middle of nowhere, dodgy stomach, not so great. So anything you're planning on bringing, which you haven't tested yet, test in these kind of last couple of weeks. Just do it around on those easy neighborhoods, have easy neighborhood walks, have a walk, have half a serving as you go through, just see how the stomach likes it. Really, really important. Also, on top of that, create a reminder plan on how you will approach these on the trail. So again, if you watch that replay, it'll talk through some, just basically rule of thumb, eat and eat and eat when you're on the trail. But come up with a plan of how you're going to remind yourself to eat and to drink when you're on the trail. Because a lot of us, will sort of rely on hunger and thirst, which kind of works for a lot of people. But sometimes we get distracted on the trip. We're having a really good time. We're distracted. We chat with people. We forget to eat. We forget to drink. So whatever you think may be a good reminder for yourself, come up with a plan now while you're at home. For myself, I always just write eat on my hand before I go on the hike, because I always have a pen and paper. I always like to journal on the trail. Sweats off within an hour, it's fine. But for me, the physical act of writing it on my hand every single morning, I'm like, oh, it just reminds me. So whatever works for you. On top of that, one thing that can happen is in the last week before you go away, depending on how long you away for, sometimes we just want to run out everything that's in the fridge, run out everything that's in the pantry. We don't want to do any groceries and this and that. So it ends up being we either get really, really, really rubbish with our food. Either we just have been really bare bones meals, or we end up just getting takeout a bunch of times. One thing we really want to just make sure during this time is the amount of people who get sick in this final period as well. It's huge, because stress is at an all-time high. All the training is at a peak, everything's sort of going on, and then all of a sudden we get sick before the trip. So nutrition plays a big role in keeping us healthy. So just pre-plan the meals before the final week. Just go on with a bit of a plan of attack and just think, okay, how can I eat healthy? I'm not going to get into it too much, but how can I make sure I'm just not having pizza every night or something like that, which some people fall into. So whether you want to pre-cook some meals the week before, like 2 weeks out, have it all ready, or just have a bit of a plan, or just make sure your groceries are on point, whatever. Very, very important. And on top of that, probably worthwhile organising a few meals for when you return as well, because quite often we'll come home to an empty pantry, we'll be exhausted from the trip, we'll be on that, what we call the post-trail blues, where we're all already a bit down the dumps and this and that. And then you'll end up having a whole week where you're just, again, getting takeout and this and that, and then we get sick, and then we start beating ourselves up. So if possible, organise some meals before you go. Buy some frozen meals, leave them in your freezer, pre-cook some things, whatever. It goes a long way. Other things, as I said, stress super high at this point. So we want to manage that as much as we can to minimize the risk of that affecting our health. So have a checklist of all the million and one things you need to organize before you go away, all the things you need to pack, all the things you need to organize with home, with work, all of this. Have that checklist, tick it off as you go. Such a simple thing makes such a big difference. Journaling, really simple stress management technique. A pen to paper, journal, literally write out anything that's in your head. Do that 5 minutes a day can make a pretty significant thing. That can be great to do before going to bed, which can really, really help. Stretching, as we sort of said before, stretching is just a nice way of just calming down the body, helping it chill out. Great to do 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day in these final weeks, or whatever it may be. Just literally anything you've ever thought of in regards to stress management and staying healthy, just throw the kitchen sink out in these final weeks. Just keep yourself healthy, manage the stress, and go as much as you can. And then final bits and pieces. So this is actually, I want to talk through self-care. So this is a really, 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 really simple thing that anyone can do if they have an ache or pain now in these final weeks of creep up. And also if you're actually out on the trail. And say you get to day 2 or day 3 and your knee starts to get sore or something like that. This is a really, really, really simple rule of thumb that you can basically self-manage discomforts that come up. It's not going to be as good as seeing a physio, but obviously physio isn't always accessible, everywhere it may be. This is a really, really simple rule of thumb. So basically, if you're hiking or in this final couple of weeks, if a muscle gets sore, you can do a little bit of massage on it. If your quads get sore, the front of your thighs, the back of your thighs, if your calves get sore, you can do a little bit of self-massage on it. Now, when you're at home, self-massage can look like using like a foam roller, really, really simple. A lot of people have seen those using like a massage gun, like I think Audi was selling them a little while ago. A lot of people have them lying around, literally using your thumbs, getting, a partner to get in there, whatever. Literally just applying pressure to those areas. If the muscle is sore, you can massage it. Now, if you're on the trail and you sort of out on the trail and you're like, hey, day 2, my knee's a little bit, my quad's a little bit sore. How do I deal with this? You can massage it with your water bottle, with your trekking pole, anything hard implement that you have. So I don't know, it's behind me. But basically, you can literally get your trekking pole and rub into certain areas. You can sort of, get a water bottle and use that as a foam roller and just roll up and down in your tent or on the campsite. You can even get one of these things, which are a great purchase, which is like a little cork massage ball. These things weigh like 5 grams. You can leave them in your pack. I always have in my hiking packs. They're great. If you want to get one of those, just go on to Google, type in cork massage ball. A bunch of brands will pop up. They all come out of the same factory, so just get the cheapest one you find. And that can be really good. But if a muscle's sore, you can self-massage it. Now, if a joint is sore, which is, a little bit, sometimes gets me a little bit more alarming, like, oh my gosh, my knee's sore, this sucks. Simple rule of thumb to help self-manage an ache or pain. Again, in these final weeks when you're actually on the trail, you want to massage the muscles above and below it. So using the knee as an example, if that gets a little bit sore, you can do a little bit of self-massage on the quadriceps, so the front of the thighs, the hamstrings, the back of the thighs, and the calves, like the lower legs. It won't fix the issue, but doing this above and below massage can often bring a little bit of short-term relief, can often get us through our adventures and can often sort of help self-manage things. Just tip it over the edge from something turning from a pain to something that's really, really not good. Don't know if you know. Simple rule of thumb. Or alternatively, if you're looking at the lower back. So lower back sometimes gets sore if we're sleeping in a tent for the first time in a while or whatever it may be. That can sometimes get sore. Same thing, we do a little bit of self-massage. Above and below, the glutes, so our bum muscles, our hips, the front of our hips, and the mid-back. Above and below the sore area of a sore joint typically gives it a little bit of love. You don't have to be a physio, you don't have to be a trainer, you don't have to be a doctor to figure that out. You can just sort of play around. You're probably not going to, you won't do any harm, and you may do some good. So again, if you're on the trail, you can use trekking pole, water bottle, massage ball, anything. Really, really simple rule of thumb. Anyone can apply that. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas. Like obviously there's a lot of other things that kind of go into it, but I think in regards to training and physical stuff, hopefully it just gives some really simple direction for the prepared and the underprepared and also a few other bits and pieces. But ultimately it's just trying to get through this last little period, fit in what you can, making sure you're getting to the point where you fly out or you step on the trail where you're kind of feeling good. You're feeling like got that anxious energy where you may be a little bit nervous or like that, but you're kind of like, ready to roll and ready to get into it. So Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully it gives a little bit of direction. I know a lot of people are heading out on the trips, but hopefully this does give you a bit of a solid overview. Ultimately, in another situation, if you don't have a trip around the corner or further in the future, if you ever did need a bit of help with your full preparation, I was always say at the end of these, love to chat with people. Now, we through Summit Strength offer personalized training programs for hikers to help them get fit, strong, resilient, for their adventures. Typically, what our packages includes is a custom and personalized workout plan to help you get ready for anything the trail may throw at you: cardio, strength, hiking, recovery, mobility, making sure it all fits around you and your life and your trip. We put a big emphasis into education around all the peripheral factors such as nutrition, recovery, self-care, mental strength, pain management, a bunch of stuff, and also give you the coaching, support, and accountability to keep you on track. If anyone did want to find out a little bit more about that, you can go to summitstrength.com.au/online. We have a big video there which talks through the program in a little bit more detail. And also you can book a call with our team if you want to have a chat. But with that being said, hopefully that helps a few people. So I saw there were a few comments in things. So let's see if some comments. If anyone does have any questions at all from any of the stuff that I went through, if any of that not so clear, or just curious about other bits and pieces or anything, feel free to pop it in the chat box. And I'm more than happy to help out. Yeah, well, forever hold your peace. Yeah. Joy, any suggestions for handling the heat? Yes, I have lots of them. Let me just think. What with? I'm just trying to pull up. Yeah, so I'll try and I do have a good thorough thing that goes into all of this. I'll pull it up and I'll send it over to Olivia. I can't remember if it was a podcast or a video or something I did. But general rules of thumbs with hiking in the heat. Hydration obviously super, super, super important. Make sure in the heat that we are also complementing that with electrolytes. So one thing that can often get people into a tricky situation with hot weather hiking is we sweating lots, so we drink lots of water. We're like, I'm hydrating. Tricky thing with that is when we sweat, we typically not only sweat out water, but we also sweat out electrolytes. Typically, when we drink water, if we're just drinking water, what can happen is the actual balance of our electrolytes can just get a little bit diluted, which in a small amount, not a big deal. In a large amount or moderate amount or large amount, it can lead to complications, which is called hypernatremia. Not much fun. There's people in Dakota that, when you hear someone's died on Dakota, that's a very common thing, or very common comparatively for that. I'm not saying it's very common, but that's usually a contributing factor for them. I didn't word that very well. Don't freak out. It's not that. It doesn't happen that often. But basically what I'm trying to sort of say is if you're on hot weather hiking, you're drinking lots of water, you want to be complementing with electrolytes. So ton of different strategies with electrolytes. You can go down to your local pharmacy, just get some like hydrolyte or anything, or you can get some stuff that has carbohydrates, which is really good. Whatever it may be, that's number one rule of thumb. Number two rule of thumb is nutrition, is basically hot weather hiking. Often we will burn a little bit more energy when we are hiking in the heat. And what happens is when we're in the heat, we also have our appetite often gets a bit suppressed. So there's a massive mismanagement of energy. So essentially, we want to make sure that we are adequately fueling, that we're really, really complementing and supporting this energy, which will help. So making sure we have a good, big array of high carbohydrate snacks, which are going to be the main fueling snacks that we have. High carbohydrate, low fat, low protein, low fiber. They're the things that are going to digest really, really quickly that you have around your meals. So your meals are a little bit more wholesome. The snacks are just sort of supporting your energy, this and this and this. And just cue yourself to kind of have a bite or two or something every single hour or something like that. Just thinking of constantly grazing on these snacks as we come through, just to keep on topping up the energy in between your meals. And then you kind of want to have a think about, okay, heat management. So obviously you want to make sure your gear's all right, making sure pad, long sleeve stuff. There's like the sun hoodies that are out now, which are pretty cool. All of that. They're really your main ones. So examples of these snacks, it's basically, if you're looking at the sweet stuff, you could sort of look at dried fruit, you could look at snakes, you could look at lollies, you could look at chocolates. It's not really like what you would consider healthy eating at home because it's this high burst of energy. But when we're actually exercising, we are using this all the time. So really anything that's just sort of like, high sugar, basically. If you want to be a bit more natural, fruit, dried fruit, really, really good. If you don't really care, jelly beans, this and this and this. On the savory side of things, yeah, it could be a webinar itself, but that's exactly it. On the savory side of things, things like pretzels, crackers, if you're day hiking, you have things like bagels or like white wraps or white bread and this and that. Obviously, not super practical on the trips. Um, but yeah, some simple examples there. But really just thinking about high carbohydrates. If you look at the back and there's like plenty of carbohydrates on it or plenty or whatever it may be, and something that doesn't have protein and fat, you're doing pretty well there. And the reason you don't want to have protein and fat for your snacks, at least, or a huge amount of protein and fat, I should say, is that just takes a little while to digest. And sometimes it can sit in your stomach, you just get a little way of things. So we just want to basically keep on fueling. So yeah, I will dig up that. I think there's a podcast or something. I'll dig it up and send it over to Olivia. So if anyone needs to know about extra tips for the heat, I've got something for you. I just can't remember where it is, but I'll get that sent over. Cool. So last few minutes before I duck off and get into my own dinner. So any other questions? Fire away, or forever hold your peace, as Olivia said. Right. Cool. Well, I'll hand it over. I'll just sort of say before I hand it over to Olivia, then, if there's no other questions, thank you so much for having me on board. I really do hope people got some good information. Hopefully, it just gives a little bit of direction for people. I know today's one wasn't quite as direct and it was a little bit more kind of figured out for yourself, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of little guidelines there. So thank you very much for having me on board, everyone. Really appreciate it.